Chapter 11. Having reached the pinnacle, the technomancer stopped to check her bearings. Although they were close to the labyrinth of thaumaturgy, they weren't as close as she would have liked. She looked at the gaudy figure of the Dark One. How would he fare in combat, she mused. And then she remembered how he had fought the rogue cybrids. Since we are late, I suggest we cut across the settlement of the Oryx, she muttered. There may be dangers, but we are very late, and the Hierophant's summons was of the utmost urgency. The doctor shrugged. Since this great kingdom business is all new to me, I'll respect your judgment. These Oryx, are they Ashley Chapel's creatures? If you mean Ashmael, the Archimage, then yes, but in the settlements their loyalty is to their fellows. Any treaty of alliance that you have with the Archimage may not be respected. Treaty? Laughed the doctor. I wouldn't exactly call it that. The last time I saw the Archimage, he was, not himself, shall we say. None of us have been ourselves since the visions came, she said, pointing towards a fog bank of golden mist. Hence my unprecedented audience with Anastasia. Might I inquire as to the purpose of the mist? Asked the doctor, squinting at it suspiciously. An odd question, but Melifere was happy to answer it. The mists divide the three realms of the kingdom, Doctor, both from each other and from the tabernacle of the gods at its heart. Only the rulers of the kingdom and their chosen ones may pass through the mists. Strays or people of dishonorable intent all suffer the same horrifying fate. Far more effective than checking passports, muttered the doctor. And since you're a ruler and I appear to be your chosen one, I suggest we get a move on. They walked towards the mist. The sky immediately changed the moment they passed through the fog, a golden glow that instantly banished the chill of the wastes. Melifere answered yet another question from the doctor, explaining that even dusk was different from realm to realm. The depressing and ominous twilight of the wastes, the indigo of the realm of Theosophy, and the burnished bronze of Abraxas. The Oryx are not known for their ferocity, Doctor. If we ignore them, our passage should be unhindered. Should they attack, however, she grabbed the doctor's bicep. A man of strength such as yourself should have nothing to fear. Now I know you're not Mel, he said with amusement. The Oryx settlement was unnaturally quiet, the technomancer decided. Although her visits to the realm of the Archimage had been rare, she always remembered it as being noisy, with Oryx carrying out their business with raucous good humor. But the tall, thin dwellings with their pyramidal roofs were silent, the huge square debating fora empty. A light breeze stirred up the yellow sand, but that was the only life in the realm of Abraxas. This is disquieting, Doctor. The lack of attention, you mean? He nodded. Abraxas is well known for the rowdiness of its inhabitants. He stopped. Now how did I know that? You are the Dark One, and your secrets are your own, she stated. Hurry now. The boundaries of thaumaturgy lie ahead. Well, 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 the Magistrix honours us with her presence, boomed a growling voice from behind them, and Melifere didn't need to turn round to recognise the person responsible. Harclane, she said dismissively. What ails you, warlord of Abraxas? Is the rarefied atmosphere of the tower too much for you? He was crouched on a small hillock, his body encased in the smooth golden armour of his rank. One hand was resting on his right thigh, the other was stroking his chin. My movements are none of your concern, Cybrid Witch, but yours? What are you doing in Abraxas? Melifere turned her back on him. Leave him, Doctor. The Archimage's dog poses no threat. As they walked away, Harclan jumped from the hillock and snapped his fingers. A number of heavy footsteps could be heard behind him. 3 Oryx appeared from the rear of one of the dwellings. Each was about 6 feet tall, and their skin resembled the armour worn by Harclane, a golden carapace with curved spikes at each joint. Their faces were carved masks with blank black eye slits and a dark gash for a mouth, while ram-like horns swept and curled from their temples. Armour yourself, Doctor, the technomancer advised, as her suit flowed to cover her. I'm afraid that isn't an option, Magistrix, he said, tugging on the lapels of his jacket. Then prepare for battle, man, she hissed, assuming a cat-like stance as one of the Oryx strode towards her. Behind it, Harclan smirked. The Oryx jumped forward and slashed out with his arm, obviously trying to wound Melifere with his barbs. She parried the blow with her own arm, but his greater weight caused her to stagger back. She glanced at the doctor. He had removed his jacket and was holding it out in front of him like a coloured sail. And to her astonishment, he seemed to be urging the oryx to attack him. Rolling to one side to avoid her own attacker, she suddenly understood the doctor's actions. As the oryx lunged, the doctor stepped adroitly to one side, and the oryx charged through his jacket and tripped. Stunned, he just lay there. Standing back, the doctor bowed to Melifere. He was unaware that the third oryx was right behind him. "Look out!" she yelled, simultaneously throwing a burst of scalding light into the face of the oryx that loomed over her. The doctor turned, but it was too late. The oryx grabbed him by the shoulders and dropped his head, preparing to spear him with its horns. Without a word, the oryx exploded, shards of fractured armor spinning outwards. The technomancer got to her feet and grabbed the doctor, who was staring blankly at the pile of golden armor that remained. "Quickly, before the others recover!" she shouted, pulling him away. Behind them, Harklan looked at the remains of his auric with an unfathomable expression, and then he looked up. "If you have allied yourself with the Dark One, Melifere, then may the gods have mercy on your soul," he yelled after them, and then smiled. The threat that the two now posed to the balance of the kingdom would occupy the archimage, and that would make it so much easier to wrest control of Abraxas. Satisfied, Harklan set off for home. Night was falling fast over the great kingdom. In the Cybrid realm, the azure light was darkening to indigo, while the thaumaturgs, safe in their warrens, sensed the silver sky turning grey. Walking hurriedly through the auric settlement, the archimage shivered as the golden fog above him began to tarnish to bronze. But it wasn't only the drop in temperature that was to blame. The horror in the tabernacle was mainly responsible. As he walked, his mind kept dwelling on the image of Saraquazel and Yog-Sothoth fused together in mutual insanity. Perhaps that crone in the labyrinth had been right. The severity of the situation demanded a cessation in the eons-old conflict between the three great powers. He made up his mind to send runners to both the ziggurat and the labyrinth as soon as he got back to the tower. If the gods were mad, it would need all their combined strength to save the kingdom. His thoughts were interrupted by the realization that he wasn't alone. He was being shadowed, but his pursuer was not an auric. He sensed a higher intellect at work. The situation was far too grave for a game of cat and mouse, the archimage decided. It was time to confront whoever it was. Stopping, he turned in the direction that his senses indicated. The only thing in his line of sight was a desiccated copse of bronze-coloured shrubs. "Show yourself!" he bellowed, but only silence greeted his words. So his assailant lacked even the courage to identify himself, preferring to hide behind trees. That was easily solved. Muttering some minor words of power under his breath, the archimage pointed a finger at the copse and smiled as it erupted into purple fire. Moments later, a figure rose from behind the flames, a large figure with a bemused look upon his face. "Harklan!" snapped the archimage. "Why were you lurking in the copse like a rogue auric?" His warlord looked from left to right in panic. "I am your archimage, Harklan, and yet you hide yourself from me." He fingered his chin. "And I can't help asking why." Something told the archimage that this was only the beginning of a difficult situation. He had always known that Harklan harboured deep ambitions that would one day pose a threat to his position, and the uncertainty that hung over the kingdom would seem an ideal opportunity. "I sensed a person of power." "Really? A person of power, eh? And you didn't realize that it was me? I find that very difficult to believe, Harklan." Harklan walked up to him. "I've just run into the technomancer. She's with the Dark One." "Really?" He was being sarcastic, but the archimage could read the images from his warlord's mind as easily as scooping the froth off a tankard of ale, and realized that he was telling the truth. And there was something about the person who claimed to be the Dark One which was familiar. They were travelling to the labyrinth. The Dark One destroyed an auric with a single thought. The Dark One's actions were unremarkable for a man of his dark design, and do not explain your clandestine behavior. He pointed a finger at the man's chest, a finger burning with power. "So tell me the truth, or I will dissect your mind." Harklain summoned and fired a bolt of psychic energy, obviously using up most of his life force to create it. The Archimage deflected it. Not easily, for Harklain's powers were base yet strong, but the bolt ricocheted off his defensive wards and exploded on the ground. Harklain was barely standing, his now emaciated form a testament to the effort he had exerted. For 20 years you have humiliated me, Ashmael. For 20 years I have pandered to your every whim, your every caprice, and you have never given me even the slightest sliver of your power. The Archimage laughed. And why should I? You were an auric that I raised to humanity for amusement, and for those tasks over which I chose not to dirty my hands. For 2 decades I ignored your rapacious appetite for power. But no more, Harklain, no more. The kingdom is entering the darkest age in its history, and your support is a hindrance more than an asset. Harklain fell to his knees. I have always supported you, my lord. Always, he insisted. Your lies are as transparent as a windrider's wings, O warlord. But death is too easy an option. He reached out to Harklain, who started crawling backwards in the dust. A simple mantra of immobilization rooted him to the spot. In the coming crisis, I cannot afford to waste the vitality that you embody, so I shall absorb you into myself. No, screamed Harklain. Spare me! The Archimage placed both hands on Harklain's head. This is far more than you deserve. It will be a painful process. For that I apologize. But you have the consolation that your essence will become part of me, and you shall share in the epiphany that I shall bring to the kingdom. And then he reached into Harklain, touching, stroking the furious vitality, and then he wrenched his warlord's essence from his struggling body, drinking the ambition, the hatred, the strength. Something was wrong. The Archimage tried to break free, but the flow of energy was more than he could handle. All he could do was accept the life force that was enervating and tainting every cell of his being. And as it did so, the Archimage could feel his values and ethics becoming tainted with those of his servant. He tried to fight the influx, but suddenly realized that he didn't want it to stop. He bathed, he luxuriated in its cold radiance, and then the transfer was complete. The Archimage rose uncertainly, allowing the husk of his former warlord to fall to the ground, where it rapidly crystallized and crumbled to dust, before a silent wind blew the remains away. Time was short, the Archimage realized, and if he was to wrest control away from the gods, he would have to act quickly. A tiny portion of his mind suggested that he join forces with the Technomancer and the Hierophant for the good of the kingdom. He laughed. The only good would be attained by seizing control of the kingdom, and by destroying those who opposed him, such as the Technomancer and the Hierophant. It was almost dark by the time that the Doctor and the Technomancer reached the labyrinth. At least the Doctor assumed it was the labyrinth. The only indication that there was anything out of the ordinary about the area of scrubland around them was the pattern of slate slabs faintly visible under the grey dust beneath their feet. "This is it?" he asked, kicking at the dust. "Not exactly an awe-inspiring edifice, is it?" Then again he remembered the original Library of St. John was hardly known for advertising its presence. The Hierophant and her thaumaturgs scorned both the surface and the daylight. Doctor. Her tone suggested that the Hierophant herself was victim of some scorn from Melifere. "Do I take it that you and the Hierophant don't exactly see eye to eye?" "None of the 3 rulers of the kingdom see eye to eye. Doctor, such is the way of these things." She looked around. "Indeed, Anastasia hasn't even the good grace to receive us into her warren," she added venomously. "I'm glad to see that even the Magistrix Melifere can occasionally be wrong," came a dry voice from behind. The Doctor span round, almost losing his footing on the dusty roof of the labyrinth, and came face to face with the Hierophant. The last time the Doctor had seen Anne Travers, she had been consumed with the imminent destruction of the great intelligence. Hatred had burnt behind her eyes, a hatred that had swept away the bitterness and replaced it with a self-destructive yet strangely invigorating strength. None of that was visible in the grey, thin woman in the plain silver toga, only a sad and barren emptiness that the Doctor found both sad and disturbing. "Still we must observe the formalities, Magistrix." Anastasia nodded at the ground, and a square hole materialized at her command. Steps were visible within, descending into the darkness of the Hierophant's labyrinth. She looked round and nodded at the Doctor. "And who is this handsome stranger, Melifere?" she said wistfully. "One of your elevated cybrids? If it is, your magics are improving." Melifere fixed her rival with an arch look full of playful mischief, and the doctor couldn't really blame her. "No, Bibliotrix, he is no cybrid. You can call him the Dark One." Clearly revelling in the Hierophant's growing horror, she added, "But if you're feeling particularly pious, he whose name dare not be mentioned will do just as well." The Hierophant moved to bar the entrance to the labyrinth. "You are a fool, Melifere," she hissed. "Whatever possessed you to bring him here? Or has he possessed you?" She glanced at the doctor, who attempted to smile. The terrified look in the Hierophant's eyes suggested that this was not a good idea. He turned to the technomancer, who assumed a very sincere expression. "Since the arrival of the Dark One was the reason for this meeting, I thought it best if I brought him with me." The Hierophant contemplated this for a moment, and then she stepped aside from the entrance. "These are grave times, and I have already broken the ancient covenants by inviting you here. One more heresy cannot damn us further." She gestured at the stairs. "Please, I bid you enter." Pleased by the relative smoothness of their arrival, the doctor was in fairly good spirits as he descended the stairs, until he heard the muttered words of the Hierophant as she closed the entrance behind them. "And so the kingdom falls?" With those reassuring words fresh in his mind, the doctor entered the oil-lit corridors of the labyrinth of thaumaturgy. Mixed feelings greeted Bartholomew as he and Luella emerged from the Cybrid settlement and saw the blue, silver and gold ziggurat of Theosophy. For the last decade, he had become accustomed to the silks and satins with which the technomancer had furnished the ziggurat. At dawn, he would throw off the perfumed sheets, perform his toilet in the marble and gold bathroom, and then take a leisurely stroll to the kitchens, where the Cybrid staff were preparing breakfast. After eating, he would inspect every room in the ziggurat, before returning to the kitchens to supervise luncheon. The afternoon would be his to fill. Lately, he had spent the time with Luella and their daughter, Cassandra, while the evenings would require more supervision in the kitchens, as the technomancer's latest banquet pushed the chef's culinary skills to their limit. And then he would entertain Melifere and her entourage with bawdy stones and racy anecdotes while crossing verbal swords with Gargill, as they sat and drank wine, laughing and crying, heckling and bantering. But a single meal of plain vegetable stew with his mother had shown the transparency of his life. A routine that had seemed so important, so vital, to the smooth running of the ziggurat, of the kingdom itself, had been exposed as an empty and decadent travesty that betrayed his birthright. As he mounted the steps to the ziggurat, he began to wonder whether the end of the kingdom wasn't such a bad thing after all. It made Melifire's skin crawl. Narrow, chilly corridors lined with books, gloomy yellow oil lamps. Surely the Hierophant still possessed enough of her gifts to light the labyrinth with floromancy. And those dreadful twittering thaumaturgs, hiding in the shadows with their whispering voices. Her dislike of the current Hierophant was hereditary. Since time began, all three rulers had coexisted in their animosity. But Melifire's spies and runners had painted a picture that she found both distressing and repugnant. The woman was eaten away with the emptiness of her life. She had never dared raise any of her thaumaturgs to humanity, preferring to hide alone in the darkness of the labyrinth. And her instinctive dislike of both the technomancer and the archimage was reinforced with a jealousy and resentment that was overpowering. "This is remarkable," exclaimed the doctor suddenly. "These books are unaltered, unchanged." He grabbed a volume from the shelves and waved it under her nose. "This book is by Bertrand Russell. Have you heard of him?" "Should I have? Some thaumaturg nonsense, no doubt." "No, Mel," he insisted. "This book was written by a philosopher on Earth in the 20th century. Does that ring a bell? He was one of Mel's favourites." The doctor's rantings were becoming an irritation, talking of this Earth and this frightening creature, Mel. "Please, Doctor, cease these prattlings. We are here to meet with the Hierophant, not to indulge your fantasies." She started to continue and then stopped. "And kindly desist from calling me Mel." He shrugged. "Whatever you say. But can you grant me a favour in return?" "Which is?" she asked in exasperation. "Kindly desist from calling me Dark One," he bellowed. "It's hardly befitting my outfit, is it?" She tugged his jacket. Your outfit obviously has other ideas, Doctor. He frowned and opened his mouth to protest, and then he looked down to where she was holding his lapel and fell silent. But his eyes proclaimed his sheer horror. The reds and oranges and yellows were dulled and darkened, and the patchwork was losing its definition. Even the cut was different. The lapels were much wider, and it hung behind him more as a cloak than a jacket. Is this some sort of camouflage, Doctor? Or are you summoning body armor to protect you from the Hierophant's bile? His voice was almost a whisper. As you said, Melifere, seeing the Hierophant is more pressing than my sartorial elegance. But the voice was shot through with a primal terror that disturbed her. They carried on down the dim corridor in strained silence. Saraquazel tried to scream, but his mind wouldn't connect with his mouth. In fact, he wasn't even sure that he still had a mouth. He wasn't even sure whether he was a he or not. His emergence should have been a smooth transition between the half-life of imprisonment in the interstitial void and the vitality of the universe within a universe that he had instructed the chapel entity to create for him. Instead, he was racked with exquisite agonies that seared every element of his being, as if he was constantly being torn apart, then smashed together, particle by particle, wave form by wave form. He wasn't even sure where he was. Any visual or physic input was scrambled and distorted well before his mind had a chance to interpret it. Saraquazel was deaf, dumb and blind, and quite probably mad, he decided in one of his brief moments of lucidity. Along with everything else, his memories were fractured and fragmented, but the knowledge of his arrival in this alien dimension was strangely vivid, as if some part of his mind was clinging to the recollection in a vain attempt to remain sane. Clasping hold of the memory, he lived it yet again. The journey was a routine one, the direct route through the underspace tunnel from his home world to the next star system. Gathering his energies, he launched himself through the rainbow atmosphere of his home world into the pink void of his native universe, sweeping past the green mists of orbiting plankton and narrowly avoiding a herd of mindless grazers, their eye clusters turning in his direction through instinct. Extending his senses, he was pleased at the lack of turbulence between his home and underspace tunnel which led to the location of his brood siblings. He would probably arrive early, which would certainly surprise them. He wrapped his iridescent rudders around his tessellated mid-carapace and sped ever faster, past the triple helices of the void drifters and the clicking, clacking constructs in which the function breeders nested. As he accelerated towards the purple entrance to the tunnel, he was faintly aware of a slight flicker to one side of his route. Dismissing it as a phenomenon of no consequence, he was concerned when he realized that he was being drawn towards it, slowly, yet inexorably. And no amount of rudder flexing or quantum peristalsis would shake off its grip. As it grew closer, Saraquazel felt his first stirrings of alarm bloom into sheer panic. The region of space that he was heading towards appeared to have been curdled, the regular structure of the continuum torn and frayed in twisted strands of pink and magenta. And then he recognized it with a jolt of horror that shocked his neural filaments, a pan-dimensional vacuum emboitment, a hole in the fabric of reality that tore into underspace and beyond. Such things were known to Saraquazel's people, but were considered to be both rare and, when they did occur, confined to the turbulent, jagged reaches of cosmic oblivion. So when he was dragged into the maelstrom, Saraquazel hadn't the faintest idea how to escape its unbreakable pull. All he could do was scream for help, not even sure if his psychic powers could break free of the emboitment. And then his mind had cut out, unable to cope with the influx of incomprehensible images and feelings. Consciousness had returned piecemeal, a jumble of confused impressions and garbled sensations that dripped into Saraquazel's waking mind. The first thing that he noticed was an inability to move, but any concerns that this might have caused were immediately overridden by the awareness that he no longer possessed a body. The journey through the emboitment had transformed his natural form, a comfortable flux of matter and energy that lapped backwards and forwards across all of the 27 dimensions around him, into a rigid lattice of mental energy served by a paltry 11. He was capable of a tortured awareness, but was unable to physically influence the world around him. And then he began to interpret the images that assaulted him, images of the environment in which he was trapped, and was shocked by the greatest revelation yet. He was locked in a frozen moment of time, his awareness coming in fits and starts when the quantum drifts permitted. He was able to understand the problem in an instant. The physical laws of his native universe were totally incompatible with those of the dimension in which he was now stranded. And the new universe, unsure of what to do with him, had anchored him to a single moment of time, smearing probabilistic echoes of himself backwards and forwards through time until they died away in whispers. Indeed, he theorized that the only reason why he still possessed self-awareness was that an infinitesimal bubble of his own space-time was trapped there with him. Panic overwhelmed him for meaningless eons, his mind thrashing across his new timeline in desperation. But when he had calmed down, he realized that escape, although difficult, was possible. While casting his consciousness over the ball of cold, solid matter that he was trapped above, he had sensed fragments of the higher science which his own people used to manipulate reality. The fragments were incomplete, corrupted almost to the point of uselessness. But with Sarah Quazel's great intellect, it would be possible to derive an equation which would recreate a limited region of his own physical laws. And then he could look for the way home. To do this, however, would necessitate physical interaction with the cold sphere beneath him, and Sarah Quazel's telekinetic abilities were stunted in this reality. He needed another agency to assist him, one of the limited yet resourceful intelligences that swarmed over the planet. And his earlier panic had brought him into contact with the perfect vessel for his purposes. A being whose mind was, in some basic, instinctive way, sympathetic to Sarah Quazel's vast mentality. Time meant nothing to Sarah Quazel, trapped as he was in a standing wave that bounced back and forth over a period of 50 years as the chapel entity measured time. But the task of gathering the pieces of the equation would be a lengthy one for Chapel, so Sarah Quazel focused his awareness on the earliest point in Chapel's life that he could reach. For 20 years he had urged and cajoled, directed and instructed, watching as Chapel collected the brief snatches of that higher science from every region of the planet. To assist Chapel, Sarah Quazel provided him with the means of creating obedient servants in the cybrids, although this was not without risk. The cybrids embodied the essence of this alien universe and might pose a danger when the time came to use the equation. The last thing Sarah Quazel wanted was to damage the universe that was currently playing host to him. Once he had initially contacted Chapel, Sarah Quazel was forced to follow Chapel's own timeline. Although it would have been easier to jump forward and check and recheck Chapel's progress, and then travel back along the standing wave to adjust and correct Chapel's actions, Sarah Quazel was well aware of the harm that this could inflict on this space-time continuum. And so he had waited. Waited until Chapel had completed what he now called the Millennium Codex, a reference that Sarah Quazel understood to refer to his own temporal anchor point. In the hours that remained, Sarah Quazel prepared for his release. The moment that he was once more immersed in the laws and rules of his own universe, he would be able to locate the exit point of the emboitment and return to his own cosmos, dragging the bubble of his own reality behind him. But it had all gone horribly wrong. Rather than turn the cybrids back into their original forms, Chapel had simply released them. Sarah Quazel could probably have coped with that, but his attention was grabbed by the approach of something far more devastating. While he had concerned himself with Chapel's incantation, he had overlooked a more minor one being put together in one of the node points that Sarah Quazel had created to limit the spread of his own reality any further than necessary. This incantation was considerably less powerful than the Codex, but it was performing a far simpler task. It was summoning an entity to Earth. An entity whose physical nature embodied yet another set of physical laws, Sarah Quazel realized incredulously. The Codex, designed and written with irreverent speed, possessed none of the contingency measures that Sarah Quazel would have included had he had the time. And it was woefully inadequate for the ensuing catastrophe. 3 totally incompatible universes clashed, with Sarah Quazel in the middle of the collision. And now that particular memory was the only coherent part of his mind. He was still trapped, but everything else was different. And more distastefully, another intelligence was occupying the same space as him. By an effort of concentration, Sarah Quazell was just able to make the briefest of mental contacts. The creature called itself Yog-Sothoth, and it was totally and utterly mad. As am I, Sarah Quazell realized. As am I, and started his soundless screaming once again. Anastasia gestured towards the 2 leather armchairs with a flick of her fingers. "Please make yourself comfortable," she said, sitting at her table and feeling anything but comfortable. Never in her wildest fantasies had she ever imagined that she would be engaging in small talk with the technomancer and the Dark One in the heart of her labyrinth. "If I've understood the situation correctly, Hierophant, I'm the reason for this unprecedented summit meeting," said the doctor, accepting a small glass of sherry from Cornelius. Anastasia dismissed her servant with a curt mental order before continuing. "In a manner of speaking, yes," she replied, sipping her own drink. "Yesterday I saw a vision." "As did I," the technomancer interrupted. "I saw the Great Kingdom, but it wasn't the Great Kingdom. Everything and everyone was seen through a dark glass, including myself." "That's what I've been trying to tell you," sighed the doctor. "Be quiet," the Hierophant snapped. "Were you able to learn much about this alternate version of yourself?" she asked the technomancer. "Only a name." She glanced at the doctor. "Mel." "My powers are superior to yours, Melifere," Anastasia stated without a trace of conceit. "So I was able to see further. My alternate life was spent in the guise of Anne Travers. A familiar name. Doctor? Only too familiar. A fruitful woman who lived life to the full, I imagine," she said wistfully. "That's one way of putting it, I suppose." He stood up and started examining the nearest bookshelf. "Have you ever wondered who wrote these books? Have you ever wondered what most of them are about, come to that?" With the fate of the kingdom at stake, the Dark One was more interested in books. But her voice was calm as she continued. "They date from the old times, before the formation of the kingdom. It is said that the heresies that were committed by the savages almost brought the gods to war, before the gods' tears sealed the kingdom from the barbarians and their unholy ways." She wasn't prepared for the doctor's laughter. "You find the situation amusing." "Dark One?" "Don't you?" he announced. "This setup is a preposterous farrago of half-baked myths and legends, hiding the truth behind an enormous conjuring trick. There is no great kingdom, can't you see that?" he implored. Anastasia smiled at the technomancer. "I see that the stories of the Dark One's poisoned tongue were true, Melifere." "So how do you explain your visions, eh?" the doctor protested. "Fantasies, sent to unsettle the kingdom prior to your arrival." And yet she had seen this alter ego, this Anne Travers. Oh, very neat and tidy, and just the sort of narrow-minded thinking I'd expect. He walked up to her table and leant over it, his face only inches away from hers. "This great kingdom is the result of a very dangerous experiment performed by a man called Ashley Chapel. At least that's what he was called in the real universe. To you, he's the Archimage. He unleashed a force which proceeded to distort his surroundings, although how it went so catastrophically awry is still a mystery to me." He picked up Anastasia's favorite paperweight, an emerald-green pyramid. "Everything and everyone, apart from me it seems, has been caught up in this reality warp." He waved a hand in the air. "Don't you see? This is all an illusion, a solid three-dimensional illusion. I'll grant you, but an illusion all the same." Anastasia was about to deliver another scorching put-down, but then her memories of Anne Travers surfaced once more. "This Anne Travers, was she aware of something called the Great Intelligence?" "Oh, yes," the doctor agreed. And then his eyes widened. "Great Intelligence? Great Intelligence?" He slapped himself across the forehead. "Of course, the answer was staring me in the face all the time, and I've been too blind to realize." He slumped into the chair. "Is this significant?" asked the technomancer. "Vitally," he announced. "The last time I saw Anne, she was preparing a spell to banish the Great Intelligence from Earth. At the time, the full ramifications of her actions escaped me." He raised an eyebrow at the Hierophant. "It was a very short meeting. But the intelligence wasn't on Earth. It wasn't even coming to Earth. And Anne's rudimentary knowledge of the power she was playing with was sadly limited. Instead of banishing the intelligence, she must have summoned it. And when Chapel ran the Millennium Codex, the intelligence was caught up in it." Anastasia stood up, her voice thoughtful. This Anne was convinced that she had made a heinous error and brought this intelligence to the great kingdom. "No, Bibliotrix," said the doctor. "She brought the intelligence to Earth, and that was what formed the great kingdom." He looked behind him at the door that led to the corridors of the labyrinth. "If I'm to stand any chance of setting this sorry situation right, I've got to disentangle the 3 sets of physical laws." He suddenly stared at the technomancer. "What did you call your particular god?" "The Lady TARDIS," she replied. "And yours, Bibliotrix?" The Dark One was testing her, but he would not find her wanting. "Yog-Sothoth, the key and the guardian of the gate." "Exactly. That's the real name of the great intelligence." He rubbed his chin. "And somewhere in this labyrinth is the means to banish Yog-Sothoth and get things back to normal." The meaning of his words took time to sink in, but when it did, Anastasia's course of action was clear. The door to her inner sanctum was flung open, and 2 thaumaturgs entered. They grabbed the doctor, pinioning his arms behind his back. "What are you doing?" he cried. "As Hierophant of the Great Kingdom, I am sworn to uphold the laws that bind us. What you are suggesting is deicide, Dark One, and there can be only one penalty for such an act." She nodded at the thaumaturgs. "Kill him!"